to Joan and Eric Niehaus for their upcoming presentation. They're going to tell us a little about the Revolutionary War period. I leave it to Joan and Eric. Thank you, Joan.
You're welcome. Thank you. All right, I'm going to be talking about life of a British soldier. Okay, I'm going to involve somewhat the American Revolution, not too much. That's something else, and it always stirs up a lot of anguish. Not on my part. However, Joan will talk about a wife in the regiment and what she would have gone through. And then I will bring another subject in, which is involving Lunenburg, Rutland, Brookfield, and Worcester as part of the American, or I should say, the American Civil War. It was the first Civil War. And finally, also an upcoming event, which a lot of people do not know about. It's one of the best kept secrets of 1774. Now I'll bring that up as my last topic. In total, it should be about an hour in presentation, and please, if you have questions, we'd enjoy hearing them, and we will respond to them, write them down, and I'll take any and all questions, okay? Okay, I am a British soldier of the period, 1775. My uniform is the way it was in 1775. Like all armies, uniforms change over time, but our period, the 10th Regiment of Foot, is 1775. We were the first unit on Lexington and Concord, and this is what we would have worn. Where did I come from? I came from England, okay? In the county of Lincolnshire, all right? And 1685, my unit, the 10th Regiment, was formed by James II. He formed us in order to put down a rebellion that was occurring by his half-brother, Monmouth. I'm not going to bother you too much with these details. However, the interesting point there was he was overthrown, William and Mary came in, and lo and behold, 7 years later, we are involved in our first battle. Our last battle is in 1709. For comparative purposes later in my talk, that involved 150,000 soldiers on both sides, and it involved over 32,000 killed and wounded in one battle, one day. I'm only saying that to show you later on the comparison to the American War. Okay, so 1709, somewhere, my ancestors disappear for a couple of years. I don't know where they went. And then in 1730, the 10th Regiment is off to Gibraltar. Garrison duty, 1730 to 1749, garrison duty in Gibraltar. What is garrison duty? I sit around in a fort, happens to be Gibraltar. I do some secondary work because my pay is not enough to support me. And I have 3 squares a day, I have a bed to sleep in, I have a nice room, usually it's a stone room, but that's okay. And it's none of the cold barracks that I'll be living in later on. 1750, I leave Gibraltar. Never fired a shot. 1750, I leave Gibraltar and I go to Ireland. I'm in Ireland from 1750 until about 1767. There is one battle, I'm not involved in it, so I once again, don't have to fire a shot. 1767, my unit is moved to North America. That must be Boston, that's where all the trouble is. No, they sent me out to the Great Lakes in Canada. Okay, why the Great Lakes? Because they were fearful of the Indians, because Pontiac's rebellion had occurred between 1763 and 1766. They wanted to make sure the Indians didn't rebel again, and because that's very costly. So I'm out there for 1767 until October of 1774. In October, I'm told that my unit is now going to march to Halifax, get loaded on board a ship, and we're going down to Boston. We arrive in November of 74, and as everybody can tell from walking outside, this is not Florida. Okay? Where am I stationed? I am stationed on Boston, what is now Boston Common, right next to the Great Swamp, which is now called the Back Bay. All right? So November of 74, I am in a tent on Boston Common, along with the rest of my regiment, because there is no room in the inn for us. The legislature and the people are arguing with my commanders that they will not accept quartering, even though they are paid for it. It is not free. Even though it does not involve their private homes, it involves buildings which are virtually empty. But that's where I am. Why are the buildings empty? Because from approximately 1764 up until 1775, there is a Great Depression here in what is now the United States, throughout the entire place. Why a depression? Two good reasons. French and Indian War, as it was called here, was the 7 Years' War in Europe. The British government was bankrupt. About 1/3 of its budget had to go to pay interest on the loans that it had secured in order to fight the war. Therefore, it needs money. It had taxed everybody in England tremendously, to the point almost of rebellion, but not quite. They also turned around and they said, okay, during a war, what do? We build ships. 1/3 of the British merchant fleet tonnage was built here in New England during that period, during the war. What do they do after the war? They stopped building ships. What do they do with all the workers who left the farm, the onion patches, and went to work in Boston? They're out of work. So you have a mixture here of people out of work, very little work being had, wages have been lowered, and now you have approximately 5,000 to 6,000 British troops arriving in Boston because of the problems here. Boston is about 18,000 people. 6,000 male British troops arrive. A little bit of an imbalance here, I think. It does give the impression that they are 100% an occupying force. They are the military. However, they are also the police to reinforce the laws that have been passed, both here in the colonies as well as by Parliament. There are no police. There are constables. They're locals. Are they going to arrest a local person? No. So that's the situation that I arrive in. And what do? Okay, I'm a grenadier of the 10th Regiment. 10th Regiment, like every other British regiment, county regiment, not royal, county regiment is consisted of about 477 officers and men, made up into 10 companies. Okay, one company is called a light company. The light company has very short, leathery helmets. They're usually young, they're usually very wiry, they're quick on their feet, and they can think. Okay, they fight independently, they don't fight in mass. On the other side is a flanker company called the Grenadiers, which is what I am. These denote a flanker company. Okay, a grenadier has white cross belting, he has a nice large hat, and he stands 6 feet tall. The hat gives him another foot. The average person is only 5'6". So I'm rather imposing, and that is the whole purpose. I'm usually big, brawny. My brain is not necessarily big, but that's okay. I know where I'm going. My officer told me. My sergeant made sure I go there. Okay, so that's pretty much the way a grenadier has to act. Where does a grenadier get his name from? Like a lot of terms in the British Army, it comes from the French. Okay, and the French grenadier used to throw, way back in the 1600s, grenades. And he would carry about 30 of these in a pouch. He would use this match up here, slow burning fuse. The air holes keep it burning. He would ignite it, blow on it, light, and throw. Pretty soon more grenades were coming back than going forward. That's never good. The other thing was the muskets that were being used at the time improved. We may not consider them much, but they were good at the time, and it was getting harder and harder for a grenadier to get close enough to use his grenade. So we dropped that. How many of these things would we carry? They weigh in at about 2 pounds apiece. We might carry maybe 30 of these. That's 60 pounds. That's a lot. Okay. In addition to that, we would also carry our cartouche, a French term, okay, which is where my ammunition is kept. And you can come up later and see it. There's a wooden block in here. The wooden block has about 26 holes, and then I would throw more underneath. Okay. During campaign, I would carry 50 to 60 rounds with me. That would consist of a paper wad. In it would be the powder, also the ball. Okay, so you take about 50 or 60 of these, there's about 10 pounds of weight that I'm carrying in that alone. I am also carrying 12 pounds of a musket. And when you add to that my bayonet, it's getting a bit heavy. Okay. I would also carry with me a knapsack, which would contain about 4 days worth of hard rations. Why would I do that? Well, because the wagon train that my wife would be with is going to be further behind. Every 3 or 4 days we would stop and wait for them to catch up so that we could replenish our food supply, our ammunition as we need it, and also so that the pots could arrive so we could have a hot meal. The average soldier is going to be 18 to 25 years of age. However, they could be 16 or 17, and they could be 45. It made no difference to the recruiter. In the American War, every British soldier was a volunteer. There was no parties going around as you see or you hear about in the history books, dragging sailors or dragging men, basically the military, into service. They found very early after the French and Indian War that a person who was dragged in generally will desert and is a poor soldier. So it was volunteer only. And as the war progressed, it was harder and harder to get volunteers. The size of most everybody came down to the point that some of them were only 5'4", and the French wanted to know at Yorktown where all these little people came from. And that is a quote from a French officer. It became harder and harder to recruit. The biggest and brawniest of soldiers generally were brought into the artillery because it takes quite a bit to push those things up hills and hold on to them as they go down the hill. As a grenadier, I was exempt from certain services, nasty services in the regiment. However, I still had to perform my duties to the best of the ability. One of my duties was to go where I was told to go and not stop until I was told to stop. And a lot of times that involved casualties, but that's what I was expected to do. My musket is a short, as they called it, a short land, and the long land was about another 4 to 5 inches longer. And it fired a ball that was approximately 3/4 of an inch in diameter, 75 caliber. It was soft lead, and it was propelled by black powder. The black powder was, I would first reach in, I would put it into my pan, okay, just a little bit of powder to ignite when the flint strikes the metal. It would then go through a touch hole, and in the touch hole it would go into the breech. The black powder is down here, it explodes, it sends the ball in the right direction. Okay, how accurate is this? Not very accurate. Then again, we're only 30 to 50 yards apart. It doesn't have to be that accurate, you just have to put it in the right direction. What is the effect of the ball on the soldier? When he gets hit, disastrous. Okay, it is slow velocity, high mass, soft lead. When it hits, it smashes. Today's projectiles go through, clean cut, you can repair the bone. These things, when they hit, they shattered everything, there was nothing to repair. The only thing the surgeon could do was amputation. There was no question about it, that was it. That was the only way to save a life. In talking to our surgeon in the regiment, he informs me that there was no morphine and there was nothing given to a soldier who was wounded. What you see with regards to drinking of alcohol, that was forbidden. They didn't know much about medicine, but what they did know was that alcohol thins the blood. This guy's going to bleed enough, he doesn't need to have thin blood. No alcohol. The alcohol was for the surgeon. He could not stop. He could not stop after a battle and eat. And he didn't feel like eating. But what he needed to do was keep his strength up and keep going. And a shot of rum as needed, or whiskey, is what kept him going for hours on end. The person who was operated on was given a piece of leather or a piece of wood, bite down and suck it up, and that's the end of it. At the end of the day, no morphine was given to him. It was called laudanum. It was not given to him because everything that came to the British Army in America came from England. And there just was not enough supply fast enough. Therefore, the surgeon would only give it to a person who he thought was going to recover. If If he didn't think you were going to recover, he didn't waste it on you. So if you were going to recover, then you got help. If you weren't, you were left alone. The 18 to 25 or 18 to 45 length of time, age, was acceptable. The Army was acceptable, contrary to what you may have read in your history books way back when. The Army was a disciplined life. The Army was a harsh life at times, especially with that discipline. But it was always considered fair by the British soldier. And even worse than the British soldier was the American. The discipline in the American Army was harsher and more cruel than what it was in the British, because of the recruits that they were getting. One of the marvels of the British Army was they were able to take people from all facets of life. Carpenters, they didn't have plumbers back then, but needlework, textile workers, whatever the case may be, apprentices. So every man in the British Army had a second job because he had a second calling in life before he went into the Army. So therefore, it was harsh, but it was fair. And it was accepted because enlistments were around upwards as much as 90%. And of the people that came in, stayed in. Okay, why would they stay in if it was horrible? Also, if you joined the Army during peacetime, it was for life. Or until they discharged you, one or the other. If you joined during wartime, it was a minimum of 3 years or duration. Very similar to the Second World War, where it was duration or time, whichever came last, not first. Things haven't changed that much in our Army, the British Army, or the American Army. It's still pretty much the same. My pay was 8 pence a day, and out of that 8 pence a day, I had, which came out to about $3.50 a day in current terms. Out of that $3.50 a day, I had to pay for my uniform and all my accoutrements. I did not have to pay for my bayonet, my musket, or my crossbelting. That was Army issued, and it was the Army's. Everything else was deducted. My food, some of it was deducted. Okay, so at the end of the day, I might wind up with, of that 8 pence, 2 pence. That's why I always had a second job. The 8 pence a day, $3.30 doesn't sound like much, but let's see, in 1966, when I went into the service, I was paid less than that in terms of my basic pay. So again, things haven't changed that much. As a recruit, it's fodder. We couldn't survive on 2 pence a day, especially if we were married and if we had children. We needed that second job, and we needed our wives to work. There was no question about it. And that was part of the conflict, because as I said, there was a depression going on here in the States. They needed to have second jobs. They needed the first jobs. And you have that in Boston, people throwing snowballs with ice balls with rocks in them, threatening British soldiers. And there was a number of cases where the British soldiers were threatened, their lives were threatened. The culprits were brought before the magistrates, and the soldiers dropped the charges. They were paid to drop the charges because the British Army did not want to have problems with the local populace. We needed a job, so did they. To make matters a little bit worse, my regiment, the 10th Regiment, because of its duty in Ireland, over a third of my regiment was Irish. And Irish back then was not a welcome sight. Boston was made up of proper British, and it was made up of Huguenots, French Protestant, and they did not like the Irish for 2 reasons. One, they considered them pretty low on the totem pole in terms of morals, and worse than that, they were Catholics. Not a good combination, not acceptable. Keep them out, we don't want to see them. And make it worse, they're wearing a red coat. So the 1/3 of the regiment, up to 50% of the regiment was Irish. So that was something that did not endear us to the local population. All right then, at this point, I'd like to turn it over to my wife, who I met in New Canada.
Bonsoir, Monsieur et Mesdames. Je suis Jean-Marie Larry de Quebec, and I met my husband when he was in Quebec. And we dated a few times, and we found that we were very much the same. And he asked me to marry him, and of course he had to meet my mother and father and get their approval. And I also had to be approved by his commanding officer to see if I was sober and industrious enough to marry Private Niehaus, who had very little money. And I was met by his commanding officer, and I decided that out of the jobs that might have been offered to me, I might as well be a nurse. Even though I had no experience, I know that once I arrived, I would be getting information on what they were expecting of me. So my parents just thought the world of him, and so off we were. But I found out very shortly that he was going on a boat to Boston. I was going to have to walk 400 miles. Well, I did give it a second thought about, the future, but no, I decided it best to do this. And so I walked, 400 and something miles through the woods, and I was not used to this type of life. And anyway, you do what you do. And so it was very difficult. And finally, we met together after a period of time back in Boston. Now, the jobs that were offered to me, of course, was being a nurse, or another job which was very popular during the day was to be a sutler. A sutler was a person that had a good deal of wares. When we were in camp, a lot of the ladies would run to sutlers because we could find new material to make dresses, ribbons, silk ribbons, and all kinds of shoes and so forth. So that was like Walmart today. And the other thing that a sutler was in charge of was that they were a canteen. It was the drinking process within the military was very controlled, as much as they could, and they had to be licensed. So the sutlers were selling their wares and also running a canteen for the regiment. Now, I decided to be a nurse, and it was all on-the-job training. And most of the work to be done by a nurse was just cleaning up, cleaning the bandages of the soldiers, cleaning chamber pots, cleaning wounds, and just changing beds and so forth. And so that was about it until you got onto the battlefield and you learned a little bit more. Another job that women had was being seamstresses, and they would make the clothes of the gentlemen, except the coats. There were tailors to make the red coats, and so then the other job was offered to me was to be a laundress. Well, I wasn't too keen on that. So I didn't. Now, for ladies coming from England, I mean, they had to come a long way. I walked 400 and something miles. Yes, it was difficult, but they had to get on a boat, and if there was space available, they would be able to have free passage to the colonies and their children also. Now, they arrived, and of course, it's a new life for them, and it was quite difficult leaving England, or Ireland, and if their husband was killed during the time that they were here, the government of England would give them free passage back to England and give them a certain amount of money to be off and running. So they were very good for them for that. And so surgery, I found, was very difficult to go through with, to watch, you know, as the surgeons were helping the battle, people being injured in battle. But the items that they were using to help them were so primitive that it was just very sad to see. So now, what I'd like to go into is to bring you up to date as to what we do now within reenactment groups. And we usually go and be encamped for one weekend in each month, starting in the spring and working our way into the fall. So 1 weekend a month. And we live as if it was back in 1775. Our utensils are 1775. And we cook over open fires. Ladies are up at 6 o'clock in the morning, dressed and out to cook breakfast for the troops. And we have to cook for about 50 people. And I mean, that's just our unit. That's just the 10th Regiment of Foot. There are several others. So what we do is we cook one thing that is very staple, oatmeal. Another is bacon and sausage. Another is kale. Isn't that wonderful? Steamed kale, very nutritious. And hash browns with onions. We eat very well. We eat in the regiment as if we were officers, and we cook that way. So we're not eating like 1775. But so that's our breakfast, and we cook in pots like this over the open fire. And what I like to use this pot for is to bake pies. And what I do is, this is a redware pie plate. You know what redware is? You can find it at Sturbridge Village, actually. And our pie crust was made of rye, wheat, and white flour. And you make it the same way, and butter. And you just make it the same way as you would now, only using different flours and using butter. And a trivet would be put in here. The pie goes on top here. And this is quite unique. I was really blown away by it. Coals are put under this pot. See, there are little legs on it. The coals are under there, coals on top. And it's a Dutch oven. It just cooks. And in about 30 minutes, you have a gorgeous pie. Yeah. And so, yes.
I have a question for you. How did you acquire your wheat or wheat flour? We weren't growing it here at that time.
I don't
We
know.
were corn.
All provisions were brought in from England. That was part of the problem. All provisions. If there was anything local, that would be very small. It would not feed an army on the move. But they would have to go through the grist mill and they would have to get it warmed down. But generally, the women were never in one place long enough to do that. So all provisions had to be carried, all provisions brought in from England. Or Canada.
What kind of pie?
Blueberry.
Whatever's in season.
I have another one that I really like, and it's onion pie. And that is made with potatoes, sliced potatoes on the bottom, hard-boiled eggs, onions, and sliced apples on top. And that's in a pie crust, like you would do a blueberry pie. It is delicious and very nutritious.
Do I enlist?
So, yes.
And you'll get a
So-
clean showing.
And
I waited for remedy.
the evening meal that we have is on like a roast beef, lamb on a spit, and we have potatoes. I mean, it's just wonderful. We have one man in the regiment that's a farmer, and he has a host of things for us to have. Yeah, so very well. Now, I'd like to show you what the utensils were of the time, and these, we have to be in period, so we eat with the same utensils as 1775. This is a fork. It's a two-pronged fork, and it has a wooden handle. Eric and I found two of these down in Brimfield. This is original 1775. Knife. This has somewhat of a, looks like a bone type of handle here. And wooden spoons. The plates were pewter. So we use that in bowls. And that's about it. Tin cups for drinking. And this, Eric picked up for me at the Sutler 2 weeks ago down in Virginia. So this is the wares that sutlers bring in. That's why we always run after the carts. I'm going to pass around some things that I'm about to use. I'm going to make a gown out of this material. It's India print. The printing block that is used to make this is a duplicate of 1775. This is from India, and we have a supplier. All of our clothes have to be period material. So,
Show that and I'll hold this.
okay. Okay, yes?
Explain how you made your
Yes, okay. Well, let's start at the bottom. Whoops, there goes my garter.
I thought that was holding a shoe
The officer didn't catch that before. I did.
There. These are the shoes, handmade shoes of, I'll take it.
That's a period shoe.
Period shoe.
Did you walk from Canada with a shoe like that?
This is the same shoe. So, yeah, these were handmade in Canada, though. I do have some white ones. We have very splashy pieces too, because we have silk gowns also for dance. And one of my buckles is all rhinestones. So, and then we have, you can see, we have socks that come up to here, okay, and garters that hold them, sometimes. So, okay, starting off, I'm gonna pass this around, and then I'll get to, these are stays. Okay, this is a sample of one. This is what a stay is made of. There are channels. We all have to make our own. I was told, I took a workshop, I was told it was gonna take me 60 hours to make them. 80 hours. Anyway, they're in here. And this was the piece that I started to work on just to learn how to do it. Okay, but this is the reed. They used to use baleen, now they use reed. And you just take the reed, you know, pull it in like this, and push it through a channel 1/4 of an inch. And you just, you know, make one channel, push a reed in, make another channel, push it all by hand. So,
No, go ahead.
what? Okay. Take that. And you can press that. Okay. Now, the layers.
I'd invite her to get up on the table, but then, you know, my officer wouldn't appreciate this.
Under all that I'm wearing is called a shift. It is here, and it's up to here and down to my ankles. It is what is known as, it's a shift. It's our nightgown and our slip. It's worn 24 hours a day, and it's made of linen. The next layer is this is the shift. This is a petticoat, linen, under another petticoat. So, 2 petticoat, this is the top petticoat. And that is under my gown. It's a petticoat all the way around. And each petticoat that there is has an opening. So you can have what's called a pocket. We make our pockets, it's put on a string around our waist, and it just hangs down like this, so we can just stuff things down there as we need it, and take them out as we need it.
How much material is there?
There's 4 yards in this top one. And then, this is called a stomacher. Okay, the gown comes to here, and this is a stomacher. It's just, everything is pinned in. Sometimes I feel like I'm a nun, you know, the way the nuns used to have pinned, we all pinned together. And a scarf. We have these linen or organdy or cotton caps that we wear. It's to keep our hair clean from the dust. Stays. Does anybody know why we wear stays? It's for posture. This is not, you know, back in the southern days when you wanted to have an 18-inch waist. That's not the purpose of stays in this period. It's posture. Yes.
Isn't it also a good support for the back?
That's
for
right.
women?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they're doing an awful lot.
Right.
Fabric and
Right.
If you're gonna lug that part around, you're gonna be strong.
Right. So,
And the expansion? Can you
yes,
Right.
actually,
These are all designed.
you can expand. This is, you see the back of that? You can expand this because it's all, you know,
String
folded
and
in.
eyelets.
It's all folded in.
Right.
Yep.
Mhm.
So if you're with child,
Yes.
it just grows with you.
Mhm. That's right. We do have classes down at the Minuteman National Park in the Colonel Butler House, which is a fantastic place to have. We have to have classes. We have professional seamstresses that do the 18th century clothes. They come in and we spend a whole weekend working on whatever is the subject.
You also made your coat.
Yes, this is, I'll show you this. This is very easy because it is just one piece of material. And all you do is, see? That's all it is. I also have a cape that I made the same way. The difference with this one is it's lined with a nice silk. Again, it's period material. So, I'm about to make a silk gown, turquoise, for 12th night. Down at the, for the dance down at Wayside Inn. We were down at the Wayside Inn 2 weeks ago. Were you there?
Yes.
Oh, it was just fantastic, right?
Yes, yeah, this is the first time I've been
Oh,
there.
yeah, there was a reenactment,
Yeah.
an all-day reenactment. So, okay.
Following up on the clothes there, okay, mine is a businessman suit of the time. If you think about it in terms of, I have my jacket, I have my waistcoat, and I have my breeches. And that's the suit of the time. My coat here is supplied once a year, if the ship arrives, by the military. And it is made of wool, and this is linen on the inside. Theirs probably would have been wool as well. Okay, sometimes linen, sometimes wool. Both are earthly products. It didn't matter to the government. Cotton at the time, very expensive. It was made for the sails for the ships because that was the best thing to have, canvas. However, cotton that the British used came from Egypt, did not come from the United States. It was too much of a process to get all the burrs and everything out of the cotton pods in order to make it. It's something like 18 hours to get 1 pound of cotton ready for processing. So therefore it was just too expensive. Egyptian cotton doesn't have that problem, and that's what the British made their canvas from. My waistcoat and my breeches are both made of that type of a canvas, duck canvas. Or they would have been made of wool, one or the other. My stockings are wool. My shoes likewise are going to be just about one size fits all, or maybe 3 sizes, small, medium, large. And that's what you have to walk with.
In the winter, did they provide you with an overcoat?
No.
No?
That was it.
And
That's it?
if the wagon train got too far behind, this was my blanket. Okay? So this was my summer coat, spring coat, fall coat, and it was my blanket if the wagon train got stuck, which generally they did in America because the roads are lousy.
Still on.
Still are, come to think of it, okay. As everybody knows, it's very hard to walk if you've got a stone in your shoe. These shoes were loose fitting, they were never meant to be tight. You kick up, in those days, mud, dirt, sticks, stones, and believe it or not, the Army does not stop just because one guy has a stone in his shoe so that he can take it out. Therefore, they issue gaiters. The gaiters are made of a duck material and then blackened with coal tar to make them somewhat waterproof. Okay, and today we still call them gaiters. The nice thing about gaiters, they're high enough up that the stones do not get into your shoes. Going through the grass, it keeps your feet a little bit drier. And if you step into mud, there's leather on the bottom so you don't lose your shoe. Okay, so they serve a number of purposes. I would be wearing my gaiters if I was going on campaign, going out into the field. I would also be wearing this coat, and like I said, once a year I would get new waistcoat, new overcoat, and provided the ship made it to the United States or to Canada. And in the case of Burgoyne, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, their annual supply was taken over by a fellow by the name of John Paul Jones. And the Continental Army was issued approximately 2,000 redcoats, which they wore as redcoats. So I can well imagine what that battle was like when they finally got there. But yes, ma'am.
How often was your clothing laundered?
Did I answer your question? My greatcoat was never laundered. Okay, the duck, my stockings, as much as I could afford to pay the person that was doing the laundry. There were times where the wife made more money than the soldier in the course of a month. Okay, because she would be laundering, she could be nursing, and one of the bad things about nursing was if I was wounded, she had to nurse me. She was not paid because she was doing a wifely duty.
In fact, as a nurse, I earned 16 pence a day plus rations, which would be more than his.
All right, did you have a second pair of trousers and a vest coat when the thing was laundered? Or were you in hiding?
Once a year I was issued my coat, waistcoat, and breeches.
Yes.
If I wanted any extras, came out that I had to buy that.
Okay.
Okay, I had to pay for this through what they called stoppages in my payroll. But if I wanted a second pair of breeches, if I wanted socks, shirt, nightshirt, really, it's my nightshirt. All of that was out of my own pay. Okay. The government also supplied me with garters to hold up my stockings and with a neck stock. Okay, the neck stock was leather made of horsehair, and it served a number of purposes. One was it kept me straight. Secondly, it allowed the sergeant to grab me by the neck stock and twist it if I got out of hand. But it also was a reminder, just as it is with most clergymen, that I am a servant of the king, and therefore expected to perform according to his wishes. The hat that I was wearing before, the bear hat, the grenadier's hat, In the French and Indian War, that looked more like a bishop's mitre, or like you see the Prussians, okay, or the Hessians wearing. It was made of cloth. After the Canada was taken over by us good British, we petitioned King George III to change that we could wear also the grenadier type hat made of fur. And he designed it, and that is his design. I can show it to you later. There is a silver plate or tin plate, depending upon how expensive it was and whether you were an officer or an enlistment man. Essentially, in Latin, it means we stop for nothing. Okay, that was our motto, and as I said, we didn't have to have much in terms of brains, we just had to follow orders. And we were the deterrent, we were the shock and awe of the British Army. Yes?
Several times on British television, like at Buckingham Palace, you see these troops and they've got these big tall hats.
Mhm.
Is that a carry-on from your time?
That is a carry-on from our time, and it is still the same black bear from Canada in today's Buckingham Palace Grenadier type units. Everything comes from Canada. That is tradition, and the British, as you well know, have tradition. I would like to change now on a subject, and that is, what is Lunenburg's involvement? What is Rutland's involvement? What is Brookfield and Worcester's involvement with the war? As you well know, after Bunker Hill, okay, the British pretty much just stayed in Boston until they evacuated in March of 1776, and never to come back again. For all practical purposes, in New England, with the exception of perhaps Rhode Island and parts of Connecticut, the war was over. There were no continental troops up in New England. It was colonials versus British. Okay, later at Saratoga, yes, there were some continentals there, but that's 1777. But for all practical purposes, evacuation day out of Boston, 1776, ended the British involvement, redcoat involvement here. So how do we have a building almost burnt down by 3 British officers over here called the Bellows House?
The Bellows House.
Bellows House, which is now the Senior Center. When I first heard about it, I thought, must be French and Indian War, it must be a mistake. Nope, it wasn't. There was an army led by General John Burgoyne that came down from Canada in 1777. It was victorious all the way down to Saratoga. At Saratoga, it was met by 2 things: insurmountable, lousy roads, and which could not permit its baggage train to get through, and the soldiers were essentially turned to eating grass. The second thing was his 6,000 troops were met by almost 12,000 colonial troops and continental troops. There was a number of brief battles, and he lost, and he realized that the position was hopeless. And rather than lose all of his men to wounds and death, he capitulated. There was a signing there, a convention, okay, terms of which were agreed to by both sides, and it was called the Army of the Convention thereafter. They were marched from Saratoga across the Hudson, and most of them were stationed on Winter Hill and on there's one other hill that they were stationed on. They could see Bunker Hill from it, in the Boston area. Officers were given parole. Parole meant that they could walk around and do what they pretty much liked, as long as they did not try to interfere with the war effort. The common soldier was pretty much kept in barns, barracks that had been built in 1775 when the 20,000 to 30,000 Americans had the British hold up in Boston. That was the Army of Convention, okay? Those 3 officers that were over here came here to find winter quarters and demanded quartering, and of course they would pay for it. But they picked on the wrong house. The guy happened to be a colonel in the American Army, and his wife did not particularly care for them. They almost burnt the place down being drunk, and a couple weeks later when he returned, they were kicked out and told to get out of town, or something disastrous would happen to him. That was Lunenburg's involvement at that point in time. Where did the Army of Convention finally, part of it was settled in Rutland. Okay, Congress appropriated when they weren't going to send them back to England. They decided that we've got to put them up in barracks. Barracks were built in what became the Rutland Prison, which closed in 1935. These barracks were 40 feet wide, 120 feet long, and double-deckers. They housed about 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers. The cistern is still there where they drew, it's called the Hessian Well. It's 12 feet in diameter and it's 70 feet deep. And that was where they drew their water, and that water was used even by the prisoners up through 1935. It's now closed, and the barracks, of course, have been torn down and burnt because they were in bad shape. But another interesting point was a sergeant by the name, British sergeant by the name of Buchanan, was in Rutland, and he had been given money by his officers to go and procure shoes, which meant he had a pass, he could walk around and try to find shoes wherever he could for some of the troops. He decided to do what every soldier does. He had a couple of drinks, and then he gambled, and lo and behold, he didn't have any more money. So he kept on walking toward Boston and got himself a job, which is always possible when all the American troops are out of town. People need additional manual help. So he got himself a job, saved money, but then he found out from one of the other British that were in Rutland, who was also in the Boston area, that he was considered a deserter, and another sergeant was placed in command of his troops. And he decided, well, since that's the case, I might as well leave. So he marched on down past Rutland and found himself in Brookfield. While he was going by there, he stopped by a house, and the woman there was very loyalist, and her name was Spooner. Her maiden name was Ruggles, and Ruggles was one of the big promoters in the French Indian War of British loyalty. He left Boston along with the British troops in 1775, but his daughter was married. She was a loyalist, the husband was not. The husband was older, she didn't like the guy, decided she wanted to go to Canada, so she made an agreement with this Sergeant Buchanan to kill him. Dispose of him, and I'll share the proceeds of the property with you. He enlisted a fellow by the name of Brooks, who was also in his company that came through, and Brooks was also identified in a book as a person who jumped ship on the way over from England because he was stealing from his fellow troops, which was not acceptable. And but they fished him out before he drowned and punished him accordingly. But anyway, Brooks was also deserting, and the two of them connived that they would get rid of the guy. And he came home, and they hit him with a log and killed him. Threw his body down a well, and took off with some of the money from the house, and were having a good time in one of the neighboring towns. I don't know which one, could have been Athol. And he got, Mrs. Spooner, her first name was Bathsheba, and she got herself caught, and she confessed to everything. And the other three guys, one of them was an American fellow, and the two Brits were all picked up, brought back, tried, found guilty of murder, and so was she. She then went on to plead pregnancy, so they had to wait a couple of months. The British guys were well known for their letters that they wrote of repentance. One fellow, the guy that jumped ship, Brooks, he was very profane, well known for his profanity and no education, couldn't read. He taught himself how to read scripture well enough that he could tell people where a passage was that they were interested in, and he also repented. They were hung. Bathsheba was also hung later after they made sure she wasn't pregnant, and she never repented whatsoever. And if you go down to the old courthouse in Worcester, and you're standing on the second floor going down, there's sort of a circular staircase there, there's a portrait of Bathsheba with the gallows in the background. And that was, so that is that particular connection of Rutland, Brookfield, Worcester, where she was tried, and Lunenburg, all having to deal with Burgoyne's army of the convention. All right. And for the last part is Worcester. Worcester is going to be celebrating this year in September. I believe it's September 6th of 2014. The 240th anniversary of the very first uprising and seizure of power from the crown of any American city, village, town in all the 13 colonies. It is one of the best kept secrets of many, many centuries. It is well documented. There is no ands, if, buts about it. They have the diaries, they have all the paperwork, and it's been written up very well by a fellow by the name of Ray Raphael. He's written a number of books. Some of them are very funny to read as well. But he documents exactly what happened. And in a brief nutshell, it was determined that enough was enough. The governor, who was also the commander-in-chief of British forces, Gage, had appointed a number of judges and magistrates. A judge and a magistrate back then was in charge of the court, and he could determine that if you were late in paying your taxes, you lost your place. So this was very near and dear to the people of the area. They could not allow this to happen. Preceding Worcester, in Barrington and in Springfield, the magistrates were blocked from taking on their duties. Okay, so they had to turn back. In the case of Worcester, they had already taken their oaths and sat and were sitting on the benches, so to speak, when there was 4,622 militia showed up and forced them out of the courthouse, and every one of them had to recant their oath of office every 30 feet going down the main street of Worcester, so that everybody could hear the recanting. There was not one shot fired. There was no muskets permitted. For the most part, they were all stacked outside of the town so that there'd be no problems. Of course, they also realized that General Gage was not going to leave Boston and try to make it to Worcester to stop anything from happening. But this was the first seizure of authority in all of the 13 colonies, and it happened in Worcester. So there will be more coming out. All historical societies will be notified, and LUNENBURG is one of the few in the north here that contributed 26 men to that 4,622 men, and no contributions that I'm aware of from either Fitchburg or Leominster. So it should be very interesting. I think it's something that should be well supported as a regiment, and also we will get the 2nd Massachusetts Regiment involved as well. We hope to go into the Worcester schools at various levels and speak to the children, teachers, in kit, okay, as to the involvement. Keep it in mind, there were no British soldiers in Worcester, there were no French soldiers in Worcester, but hey, that's what the kids want to see. It gets their attention and they hear us talk, it's well worth it. And that's pretty much it from a presentation. I do just want to say up here, what I have spoken tonight, you always try to get first sources, okay, diaries. This is a British soldier's story. It's documented. It comes from a fellow Lamb, who was in Burgoyne's army, escaped, made it back to New York, joined another regiment. As luck would have it, he went south with the regiment and got himself captured again at Yorktown, and escaped from Yorktown back to the British. And in fact, he wound up saving a general's life and was remembered and got his pension. His pension, by the way, was 1 shilling, 12 pence, okay, a month. Okay, so not much of a pension. There's a Hessian diary. Gives some pretty good information as far as the difference between the two armies. And one of the interesting things was, in the Hessians, their allegiance was to the king, who just happened to also be the King of England. And when you think about it, the British regiments, we were paid by our colonel, who never left England, of course. No regimental colonel ever left England. They were over there, they collected the money, and they made sure that we got our clothing, they made sure we got our pay. But they stayed there. Okay, it was a lieutenant colonel that ran the regiment in the field. So the king pays a colonel, a lord, who's in England, who then pays the regiment. The king pays the prince in Hesh countries, who in turn pays his regiments. Any difference? Am I missing something? Both have fidelity to the same king. So why do we call them mercenaries and British soldiers British? They both had allegiance to the same king. It's one of those little quirks that's always interesting. I open it up to questions for either one of us,
I would
please.
just like to say one thing.
My hair's out of place?
One of our big events that you can see very, very readily is the encampment that we have at Sturbridge Village, which is the first weekend of August. And last year, this past year, there were over 10,000 people that visited. It was the largest weekend open at Sturbridge Village ever. And we were able to contribute approximately $240,000 to them on all of that, the tickets. And also, as part of my business within the regiment as a nurse, there are surgeons that are participating in Sturbridge Village during that weekend also. And they have all their wares, all their pieces of equipment. And so, don't get too close. But it's interesting to see what they used during those times. Yes.
Will you please tell me that you did not walk along those 400 miles?
No.
She followed behind all the carts, and that's where the term camp follower is.
Yes, oh, that's where that comes from.
They followed with the wagon train.
Smart.
Right.
Yep. And just to also let you know, one thing that everybody seems to always avoid in every war is logistics. Okay, to give you an idea, for Burgoyne's campaign to come from Canada down, for 90 days carrying all the supplies that he needed, he had 1,622 carts. Those are Canadian carts. They have only 2 horses. They aren't the big wagons that you see where you've got oxen and others. So when you think about it, if he has 1,622 carts, multiply that by 2, so that's 3,200 horses, okay, to carry for a 90-day supply. So when he ran into problems with the road system, everything stopped. And so, you know, when you think about it, the roads weren't good. The British tactics, very commendable. We weren't dumb, we didn't stand there in red just to be shot at, okay? The Lights and the Grenadiers both moved. We moved quickly. Our tactics actually came in 1774. And we learned very quickly that the garrison troops, those that are older, those that are recruits, we left them behind for the most part. They stayed in New York. Most of the combat that was done by Burgoyne and also by Cornwallis in the south was done with an army never more than 6,000, and it was composed of Lights and Grenadiers, fast-moving and willing to put up with everything and not being slowed down by older or inexperienced people.
At the battle at the bridge in Concord, some British soldiers were killed.
Yes.
Were they buried there and then they were reinterred somewhere else in the United States?
I believe that there was at least four soldiers killed at that bridge.
Yeah.
2 of them are still buried there.
They are.
Those are graves.
Okay.
On Patriots Weekend, okay, on that particular Monday, we as a unit go over and we do a morn arm ceremony in front of those 2 graves. For those of you who don't know, we have November 11th coming up, which is Veterans Day here in the United States. It used to be called Armistice Day. And we separate the living vet, November 11th, from those who have deceased, which is Memorial Day. In English-speaking Commonwealth countries, France, Belgium, etc., it is Remembrance Day. November 11th is Remembrance Day. And that is when they mourn the loss of all of their vets at that time. So we do that at the North Bridge. Okay, we also do it in Lincoln. If anybody ever wants to see a very moving ceremony, we go to the Lincoln Cemetery, the old cemetery. And aside from many patriots that are buried there, there is also the grave of the soldiers that were killed on Battle Road on that day in April 19th, 1775. And it was the women of Lincoln who got the carts, went out and picked up the dead British and gave them a burial. And buried them in a Christian cemetery, which, if you can imagine the reaction of the townspeople, they were being buried in a church cemetery. Not well received, but they respected them.
Good.
So that's a very moving ceremony, including the morning arm salute.
When does that take place?
That occurs the weekend following, Saturday following. And that same morning arm salute, if you ever watch up in Canada, if you go online, you can see the Remembrance Day salute. It's a very slow-moving, very quiet, no commands are given, and the music is very doleful, very nice. Questions, please? I'll even take them if they have to do with the American side.
Eric, you might have answered this, but did you have a dress-down uniform?
No.
Dress-down uniform. Well, a dress-down uniform for them would be, I would have perhaps an old jacket that had seen its better days. So I would save this one, and I would put on my old jacket. Maybe it's been cut. We're going, for instance, cut all of these tails that you see on my coat, and took that wool to patch up the rest of the coat. Okay, because his coats went with John Paul Jones. The cockade hats that I had somewhere, I don't know where, oh, it's on my head, okay. They were in a shambles. They were in a shambles, so what they wound up doing was they took this, which is a forage cap, okay? And I take my wig off. And a forage cap is just that. It's for going out chopping wood, it's for doing duty around the camp or whatever it may be. And he had his units cut off the excess and used that wherever needed. And then he put pieces of what was left of these hats on the front with a little bit of metal, and they put various feathers or hairs of cows, okay, so that each regiment was distinctive, but they cut it down so at least they were uniform and they were able to do their job. So it was interesting. And in fact, there was one quick story, and that was, in doing it, one of the fellows wanted to have nice red plumes. And they got the bright idea, several of them, to go out to the farmer's field and cut the hair off the cow's tail, which was nice and white and lengthy. And they were doing that, and they were spotted by the farmers, who got his neighbors together, and they went out with sticks and they beat these guys really bad. And they went back and complained to their officer about being beaten, and the officer said, "Did you have your sidearm with you?" And the answer was no, and he says, "Well, that's the same as an officer must carry a sword. You have to do that. I think your beating is sufficient punishment." But they put those into the hats. They adapted. The British Army was not dumb. It had to adapt in its clothing. It had to adapt in its tactics. One of the tactics that it came to grips with was the fact that basically the Americans could not fire rapidly their muskets. And if they had a rifle, that was even worse. They could pick you off further away, but they couldn't reload very quickly. It takes about a minute and a half to reload a rifled piece, okay? It takes, in that minute and a half, I can get off 4 to 5 shots of this, but not as accurate. But if I attach to it the terror weapon of the day, which is this. The musket was not the terror weapon. This was. Okay? So as a grenadier or as a light, at 100 yards I would begin a quick movement. At 75 yards I would be almost at a full run. At 50 yards, which is the killing zone, I would be at a complete run. My musket would be loaded. I would not stop to shoot. They learned a lesson from Bunker Hill. You do not stop to shoot. You keep going, and when that guy American fires his first shot, and he's trying to load in a minute and a half, you have covered that 100 yards with a bayonet. He's got a choice. Stoop it and stay, or run. And the Americans ran. Out of 13 battles, Washington won 3, lost 10. But he knew how to delay, and that's what cost the British everything. The provisions had to come from England. They had to feed their army from provisions. They couldn't live off the land, and they had no help because people were afraid to help, even if they wanted to. So this is the terror weapon of the day, the bayonet.
Then Americans weren't using bayonets?
Not until later. Up here in Massachusetts, the Acton Minutemen were, in fact, putting this lug nut onto their muskets, which was against every rule of the books, okay? But they were doing it, and that's why they went first across the North Bridge and got shot, okay? Because they had the lug nut. But by and large, no, you did not have muskets. You did not have bayonets because you didn't need it. But the Minutemen, contrary to popular opinion, were very well prepared and very well led. They were not the weak, meek, humble little farmer that our history books portray them to be. The Minutemen were just that. They had to be ready in a minute. Generally, they were not family men, they were single. And they were the ones with all the testosterone running, and they wanted to be out there right away. You then had militia that followed up the Minuteman. The officers of the Massachusetts units were seasoned officers of the French and Indian War. They knew exactly what needed to be done, when it needed to be done. They trained their militia to do exactly what they had to do. They were not inexperienced. In fact, as I pointed out, 1709 is the last time my regiment fired a bullet in anger until April 19th, 1775. Who was inexperienced? Okay?
Not only did you make such a splendid target, so obvious in the green countryside, and the Minutemen hid behind the trees and all.
You've been reading those history books again. 1955, a lot of people in Lunenburg had to send to New Hampshire to get their wood supply. There were no trees. It was all farms. In 1775, there were very few trees anywhere near Boston. They'd all been chopped down. Wood had to come from Canada and from Maine on board ships for the wood fires in Boston. There was no wood. The only trees they left standing were orchard trees and trees along the road so that it would be shady in the summer and block the snow in the winter. Other than that, it was chopped down. There were a lot of rock piles, I'll tell you that. And yes, they were very adapted behind those rock piles. But, and the British lost control of their men. The British officers were good. The men were inexperienced. We had never been in combat. That particular night of April 18th, just to give you a quick rundown, my unit was involved. The Grenadiers and the Lights were in the vanguard, the 700-man British vanguard. The other 8 companies, the battalion troops, came up as the reinforcements the next day. For me, I was ordered 3 days of rations, get ready, and you stand in Boston April 18th, it's not Florida. And I'm rowed across at night in a boat, small boat, dropped off in Charleston, and they didn't drop me off at a wharf, they dropped me off in a swampish, brackish water. So right away, the first thing is I'm up to my knees in mud and water in April. And I'm standing on the shore waiting for everybody else to get rowed across. And then typical British, this unit has to be first and that unit has to be second, and they got to move everybody around. And I ate all my rations, so now I don't have anything else to do. And I marched off. The British learned from Salem, when they tried to take the powder in Salem, don't cross bridges, because you never know. Bridges back then weren't nailed down either. They were loose planks, so you make lots of noise. So every time my pants started drying and my socks started drying, I walked across another stream. I can hear bells ringing, I can hear shots being fired, I can hear all kinds of warnings. So I know that they know that I know I'm coming. Okay. 17 days before this, it was announced in church in Concord and Lexington that the British were going to be moving against those 2 towns. They didn't know when. Hence, unlike Longfellow, the poem there by Mr. Longfellow, It wasn't the British are coming, it was the regulars are out. We were all British. So why would you announce the British are coming? We were all British. The regulars are out. But at any rate, I knew that what was happening. The Minutemen knew what was happening. They showed up at Lexington early in the evening, waited around. They sent guys out to try to find out just where we were. They never came back, so they figured the guys were still looking for us. And all of a sudden, we appeared. And they came out at Buckman's Tavern. A shot was fired, and we fired back. Who fired the first shot? No one knows. And then the unit continued on to Concord. And they were better prepared. They knew so far in advance, they moved all the cannons that they had, buried them in the fields. They had cannons. There was over 38 pieces of artillery stolen at various times from William Castle by the New Hampshireites, and 4 cannons out of the Boston Arsenal, brass cannons, one of which is now hanging up in the top of the Bunker Hill Monument, and another one is at the Minuteman National Park. And the other 2 were captured by the English from Benedict Arnold's group up in Canada. They had cannons, they had muskets, they were making the lug nut for the bayonet, and they had started making ammunition almost 7 months in advance. As a unit, we can roll out 1,500 rounds of ammunition in one day. So if you have 7 months to roll out ammunition, you can make a lot of rounds. So it was not that that the militia was not prepared. They were well prepared, and they knew it was coming, and they were ready for it. And there was a rumor in 1774, I can't remember if it was August, maybe September. And the rumor was that Boston had been fired upon and Boston was being burnt. And that rumor was spread all the way down to the bells were tolling in Philadelphia, documented. And it was that Boston was burning. And furthermore, there was almost 15 to 20,000 militiamen on the road, armed. The wives gave them all kinds of food, ammunition that they had rolled, and sent them off to Boston to avenge the murder of the Bostonians. They eventually found out there was a rumor, turned around and went back. General Gage looked at that incident and said, it was a mob, no officers, no leaders. Don't have to worry about it. 15, 20, almost 25,000 men on the road within days. Continental Congress is meeting in Philadelphia, and all they could say was, oh my God, they're ready for independence, and we're talking about trying to have a peace. If we don't get on the bandwagon, we're going to be overthrown. That was their reaction. So, no, it was not, a instantaneous combustion war. It was well planned, well led on both sides. Gage was a captain under Braddock. He was noted in, as they say, noted in dispatches for his bravery and commanding the light infantry as it fell back with the French forces attacking in the Indians. Likewise, Washington was a captain and on Braddock's staff, and he was noted also for his bravery and controlling the situation. The officers knew one another very well. They knew what they liked, they knew what they didn't like. General Howe's brother was cried for by the Americans when he died in the French and Indian War. He was so well liked. And he knew Stark from New Hampshire, and he knew all the others. They all knew one another. They weren't enemies. Howe was very pro-American. He tried to issue a letter to Washington to say, let's talk before this goes any further. Washington sent it back. It was addressed to the Honorable George Washington. Sent it back. This is a personal letter, I don't accept it. A second letter was sent. Honorable George Washington, Esquire. That's a personal letter, I don't accept it. He wanted it addressed to George Washington, Commander-in-Chief of Colonial Forces, which Howe could not do without recognizing the government. And at this stage, it was not a revolution, it was a civil war, and you can't recognize the other side. So, vanity, both sides. Questions? I think there was some in the back.
No, you answer.
No, okay.
I was gonna ask, how were they prepared?
What happened to your regiment after all of this? Did you
My,
stay, did you go back to?
My regiment participated in Bunker Hill, both the Whites and the Grenadiers. Again, the Hat Battalion did not. That's 8 companies out of 10 did not participate in that event. We left Boston, went to Halifax, we regrouped, and we came down to New York. Okay, we participated in all the New York battles. We participated in the Philadelphia campaign. We were noted in the Germantown battle and in the Monmouth battle on the way back. By that time, most of the regiment had been pretty well shot up, and the term back then was we were drafted. What that means is that the officers, sergeants, and musicians went back to England to form a new regiment, and everybody else was disbanded into other regiments to fill the holes. And that was, so the 10th didn't die, the 10th just went back to England to start anew. Every grenadier unit had 2 fifers and its own drummers. Most of the other companies only had drummers. However, if it's not well known, fife and drum was, the drum was communication. Okay, they were after a battle, they would be the corpsmen, okay, of today. However, during the battle, the drummers were the only form of communication that everybody could hear. Therefore, if you see one of our drummers and musicians, the colors on their coats are the reverse of what you see on me. So where I'm red with the yellow facings, they are yellow with the red facing. So that they were very easily found on the battlefield by an officer, so that he could issue the command, and everybody understood the beat of the drum, what the command was. Okay, and that was the only way you could communicate on the battlefield. Likewise, it was the unwritten law, you don't shoot the musicians. Okay, A, they're corpsmen, and B, if you shoot the musician, they can't communicate. If you can't communicate, you have a big riot on your hands. You don't have a battle anymore.
The flag that you carried, is it today, the Union Jack like they have in Great Britain, same flag?
We carried 2 flags. One was the Union Jack, and the second one would be our regimental colors. And we would carry them not too often into battle. It's just like the bear hat, you know, certain things you left behind. We also had swords as a grenadier, but we didn't carry those into battle either. I mean, you can only take so much before you're exhausted. So, and the colors were something that you just did not want to lose. In Burgoyne's case, the 9th Regiment, the colors were wrapped by one of the sergeants and put into an officer's baggage so that it would not be disturbed by the Americans when they confiscated stuff. And when they got back to England many years later, the colors were represented to King George so that they were never dishonored. No trick questions?
No trick questions?
Thank you so very much. Actually, my colors are a bright red, and that's because it comes from a root of a plant, very cheap. Why did Britain choose red? Because we were the last country on the then European continent to decide to have an army. Why do you need an army when you're an island? You need a navy. And an army is always to be distrusted, and even today, if you follow the Constitution, every year the army has to be reinstated, according to the Constitution. Because armies have coups d'etats, navies don't. But, the red is from there. The officer's red is more of an orange red, and that because it comes from a beetle found in Mexico. But to give you an idea as to why red, you can take a look at these pictures. You know, nice crispy red there. Just a couple shots later, you can't see anything. And if you add to it, that's a couple cannons going off, And you can see in the background here, if you want to come up closer and take a look at these, it's nice and clear. Yes, easy targets if you can get close enough. The flanking companies, which is what I am, keep everybody away. So it comes down to how do you see unless you have red. Okay. The Prussians took blue, the Russians took green, the French had a white, Austrians had a bit of a white as well. So everybody grabbed all the better colors, and we were left with red. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.